Hi everyone, and welcome back. So in the past 2 weeks, we looked at the two different ways that we'll be making melody in this course, that being using audio samples and using MIDI programming. And so what we're going to look at this week is a little bit of theory that can actually help us to write that melody, or more specifically, to know which notes or keys on the piano roll that we can use. Now the first thing we're going to look at before we open up a project and apply this in practice is some of the more conceptual theory underpinning scales and melody. And we're going to start here with the 12 different tones that we have available in Western music. And so to start, there's just a few different things to explain. So for one, all of these letters here represent a pitch, and at the moment they're all in sequential order. So for example, the next note higher than a B is a C, and then the next note higher is C sharp, etc. And they're all sequential. The next thing to know is that this pattern of tones here is recurring. So the next highest note after a G will be a higher A here, and then an A sharp, and then a B, and so on. But then if we were to go lower than this A here, the next lowest note would be a G sharp. So think of these letters here as recurring and extending both sides. So then finally we have these two notes that are stacked on top of each other. And that's because it's actually just a single note, but with two different naming conventions. So to explain, the pitch that we have in between A and B, we can either call A sharp, meaning one semitone or one piano key if you like, higher than an A, or we can call it B flat, meaning one step lower than B. And again, A sharp and B flat are the same note. They describe the same pitch but with two different naming conventions. And on that note, you'll notice that there's actually not a pitch between some of these tones here. So between B and C, there's not an actual unique pitch in Western music, just the same as with E and F. There's no pitch in between them. Now the subject of all these naming conventions called enharmonics is quite complex, and isn't actually particularly relevant to us here in digital music making, because we're not actually having to play an instrument or notate music for another instrumentalist to read. So in the scope of this course, you could call this tone here, between a C and a D, either C sharp or D flat, and it wouldn't matter. Which, just to put into context quickly, if we went to a little piano roll down here, this black key, this specific black key, is a C sharp or a D flat. And again, it doesn't really matter to us here which one you call it, you'll just know that you'll be using that specific note. So with all of that established, we can start talking about the formula for figuring out which notes to use in our project of a specific key. So if I just go across to GarageBand for the moment, you'll see that the project, of course, has a key, at the moment being C major. And then if I come back, we can use this major scale formula down here, so this sequence of numbers, to find the correct notes for that key, or the C major scale, for example. So when we know these 12 tones of Western music in the order, or when we have them in front of us, what we do is take any given starting tone, and then count up through the notes by this sequence of numbers, to find the 7 unique tones that belong to specifically that major scale. So our sequence is 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. So if we come back up here to demonstrate, I'll get out a shape tool. And if we put a little circle around our starting note of A, we can start to count up the rest of the tones in intervals specified by this major scale formula to find the notes for A major. So first we go up 2 tones, then up another 2 tones. Now we go up 1 tone, then up 2, up 2, up 2, and then that final leap of 1 note is just specifying that we can then return to A. So the scale would keep continuing above us, meaning that our notes for A major that we've just discovered are A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, and G sharp. And of course we can do this for any starting pitch. So if I come back up and we delete those circles momentarily, let's go ahead and do the same for C major. So if we use C as our starting note, then again we can follow the same pattern. We can count up 2 notes, 1 note, then 2 notes again but looping back around to A, and then a final 2 notes. Of course again with that last one step being to get back to our C, so our home note here. So now with that figured out, that means that the scale of C major has the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and B, which if we recall was the key of our project. So C major, meaning that we now know which tones we can use to mostly guarantee a pleasant and cohesive sound that won't have any clashing. But of course, as you'll note, all we've discussed so far is how to find these letters themselves, so the theoretical representation of the notes that we can use, which won't actually help very much if you're not used to these letters or which notes they are on a piano. But fortunately for us in practicality making digital music, we can actually apply this same major scale formula logic just to the piano rolls that we see in our software. And the reason for that is that a piano is actually just a graphical representation of the theory that we've seen up here. So again, I'll get rid of these circles and then resize this so we can see both. And actually we won't need these 12 tones here anymore, as I'll demonstrate, so I'll just resize this window. Yeah, so here we see our formula, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. And without actually knowing those note letter names, we can simply count up the keys of the piano roll. So if we start here on a C, we can go up 2 keys, including these black keys. So 1, 2 to this note, 1, 2 to this note, and then we go up 1 key here, then up 2, up 2, up 2, and up the final one to get us to our next C. So this of course means that C major on a piano is only these white keys. But again, what all of this means in general is that if you find the note and letter names confusing, then all you'll need to do is find which note your actual project key is. So say your project was in F sharp, you could hover over your piano roll until you see the note F sharp. Then starting from here, you can simply follow that formula. So you go up 2 to this first black key, another 2 to the next black key, and so on. And with that, you'll be able to find the notes for any major scale in any key. And just to wrap this up thoroughly, we'll come into the project now and put that into practice. So as we saw before, this project has a key of C major, and I've already dragged in just 2 basic example loops to get us started. So I'll have a listen. And as you'll see, I've created a MIDI instrument up here for us to be able to program in some melody. So I'll open up the editor. Hopefully this looks somewhat familiar to Acid Express users. It's very much the same vertical piano roll with the same area to input notes. But of course, because we have that keyboard here, we can simply count up using that formula to find the notes we want to use. So we're in C major, meaning that our starting note is C. And then we can count up. So we've got our starting note, up 2, then up 1, then up 2, 2, 2, and then 1 more to get back to C. Which means that each of those specific keys that we pressed in any octave, so however high or low we go, will all work with the rest of the music. And of course you will be using your ear too, but this is just to give you a bit of a framework to get started without you having to purely trial and error every single key. So now with that knowledge, the knowledge that these particular keys will work, I'll go ahead and record in an example melody just over these 2 loops. And just note that I'm using an external MIDI keyboard for this, so you won't see me draw any notes in this editor, but it will be recording my performance data from a piano keyboard up here. So I'll do that now. And what we'll see now, if I zoom out a little bit and just highlight all of these notes, is that they all fall on those specific notes that we discovered belong to C major. So for example, I'll zoom back in and take this note here, but then move it down to one of the black keys. We'll immediately hear some noticeable dissonance that clashes with the rest of the song. And this brings up an important point to still use your ear when you're putting in these different melodies. Because if you've gone to use this approach, using this formula to count up these notes here, then you could well have miscalculated and gotten one wrong, so don't blindly trust what you've written in. Always make sure to use your ear and check how everything sounds together. So now just one final point to finish up. This is just one scale, and in turn formula, of many different scales. The other most common scale being the minor scale. Now given that, for anyone inexperienced, I'd highly encourage that you either just use your ear from the start, if you find any of this theory intimidating, or if you do intend to use some of this to help guide you, then just stick to the major scale relevant to your project's key. So if your project is in A major, use this formula to find the A major scale, and then use those notes as a starting point for your melody. But of course still use your ear because you can have interesting chords in different loops that sometimes that melody note won't be appropriate for, so always put your ear first. So then in turn, for anyone who does have some experience with music theory, with harmony and scales, you can absolutely feel free to use any other scale or any other type of harmonization that you desire. Again, just make sure you use your ear to guide your creative intention, and if you're doing anything experimental, let me know in your written document so that I can assess your intentions appropriately. Hopefully all of this has been helpful and not too confusing. I'll be putting both of these files here up on Blackboard so that you can use them as a reference. They're just picture files, so you can open them up in a little window like this to keep over the top of your project while you're trying to figure out a melody. And as always, please ask any questions if you get lost or if you'd like some help with this sort of stuff. Whether that be through the forums or the online chat, I'm happy to help. Thanks everyone.